Hi, everybody. My name's Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I play a crapload of games. And not as many as I would like, honestly. Today we're going to look at Unleashed. We looked before at the two books, the two main books of the Iron Kingdoms RPG line. Iron Kingdoms itself, and then Gods and Nations, which is like a big fat setting book. This is the biggest, fattest book of the entire line, and in fact, it is the largest RPG book that I own. That is well over an inch thick. It is just disgustingly huge, but in the best possible way. So, hooray! Unleashed is the flip side of Iron Kingdoms. It is a standalone RPG that is fully compatible with Iron Kingdoms in the same way that Hordes is fully compatible with War Machine. Brief background: this game line was originally created as a D&D 3.0 setting, homebrew setting, set in what's called the Iron Kingdoms of Immoren, about a kind of steampunky, mage-punky world where people would fight with giant robots. So it's all got all the high fantasy stuff, wizards and castles and dragons and so on, but it also has fairly advanced technology. It has gunpowder, it has trains, and it has big stompy robots. Then that became a war game and was far more popular as a tabletop miniatures game than it ever was as a D&D setting. It's a fantastic role-playing setting, but the war game completely took over. And then they expanded the war game into a second game called Hordes instead of, whereas War Machine was about the civilized nations fighting with giant robots, Hordes was about the kind of uncivilized primal people who lived in the wilderness fighting with giant monsters. And the games are fully compatible with each other, although they use different systems. Really well designed and a lot of fun. I've got a ton of armies right over there. I actually own 3 War Machine and 2 Hordes armies. But eventually they decided, let's get back to our roots, and they started working on their own homebrew RPG system that was not based in D&D. And that's what Iron Kingdoms is. That's what Unleashed is. Now, before we get into this, I do want to say that they announced a few months ago that they are developing a D&D 5th edition book for Iron Kingdoms. It's called Iron Kingdoms Requiem. They announced that they're going to have a Kickstarter. That Kickstarter hasn't happened yet, but there is absolutely no D&D 5e setting I am more excited about than the Iron Kingdoms, and I will be kickstarting the living hell out of that Kickstarter when it finally shows up, because I'm very excited about it. I love this setting. I love this world. I'm very excited to have a 5th edition version of it. And once that comes out, that might obsoletize all of these other books that we're looking at. But I don't care. I'm going to look at them anyway because I like this one a lot. I do not have this in PDF, and so I'm going to spare you the horror of flipping through this book. But what I am going to tell you is that there's a ton of setting information here. Just like Iron Kingdoms has, a 10,000 year long history of the world, so does this. Where do all these people come from? What are their, cultures like? What are their history like? How do they relate to each other? How do they relate to the civilized kingdoms? Whereas most of the Iron Kingdoms book is about humans, with a little bit about dwarves and no real discussion of the Iosan elves. This book deals with a ton of non-human species. In fact, most of them are. You can be goblins and you can be trolls in the other book, but for the most part, you're going to end up as a human. This is not the case. The trolls have their own, kind of wilderness tribes. There are what's called bog trogs, which are like these amphibious, scaly frog sort of lizard things that live in the swamps. There's pharaoh, which are giant kind of bipedal warthogs and boars, and they've got tusks and big spiky hair, and they're really nasty. There are gator men, which, exactly as they sound, are alligator people that live in the swamps. There are the Nis, who are a kind of winter elf, sort of, kind of. There are the Tharn, who are like kind of like were people. They're not full on werewolves, but they do have the power to animalistically shift their bodies, very similar to shifters in D&D, although they predate them by quite a ways. Um, yeah, and then of course there's also a couple of different options to be humans. The Circle Orboros is this druidic faction that has a lot of black clad humans that are there. So there's most of the characters, I think, that get played in Unleashed are going to be non-human, and most of them are going to live out in the wild. Now the career system in Unleashed is the same as the one in Iron Kingdoms, by which I mean the really clever, really fun pick two careers and combine them thing. I love the way this career system works, and it's such a great innovation where you are able to pick, let's say Warcaster, which is the fancy magic person who can control the giant robots, and then combine that with anything else. With you want to be a bandit, you want to be a sharpshooter, you want to be whatever, mix those two things together. Do you just want to be a bandit and a sharpshooter and forgo the giant robots altogether? You have that option. The ability to pick two careers that are each designed as half a career and you mush them together to create your own thing is a wonderful innovation and my favorite part of this role-playing system. In Unleashed, it doesn't work as well because the system is a lot more restrictive. I will absolutely break the green screen and the camera if I try to show you the chart. But there are 31 careers in this setting. The vast majority of them, 2/3, maybe even 3/4 of them, have specific racial requirements. And then about half of them, 13 out of the 31, so just shy of half, are magic using classes. And what that does is, or rather, they're not, yeah, anyway. What this does at the end of the day is it restricts your options so much more. So, one thing I did not explain is that when you are picking a class, you will also pick an archetype. And these are skilled, expert, and I don't know. They're like, if you want to focus on being a fighter, if you want to focus on being sneaky, if you want to focus on being smart, and if you want to focus on being magic. Those are your 4 archetype options. And so, in theory, and in Iron Kingdoms, you are able to have this enormous spread of options as you can combine those 4 archetypes with any class, with any other class, and mush them together. If you want to be a magic user, you have to take the gifted archetype, but that's the only real restriction in any of it. That is not the case here. 13 of those classes require that you be gifted. You have to go out of your way to pick a 2-class combination that is not going to result in you using the gifted archetype, because almost fully half of the careers require it. And so you're limiting your options significantly. Also, like I said, most of the careers have a racial requirement as well. So if you're going to be a pharaoh, for example, that just cut your options way down, way, way down. So the career system is still brilliant, and I still love it. It just isn't as complete, it isn't as variable and as modular as I wish it were in Unleashed. Now, that said, the combinations that do exist are fantastic, and they allow you to do a lot of really fun things. One of the main ones, of course, just like Iron Kingdom has the Warcaster that controls the giant robots, Unleashed has the Warlock, which controls giant animals and monsters, and those are fun. They have copied a lot of the Horde's wargaming system into the magic system to control the beasts. And so what you're doing, if you're a warlock who has a giant beast, you have to rile it up. You have to force it to generate fury. And so you send it out to attack, and every time it does something, it generates a little extra fury points. And then on the next turn, you as the warlock can leech all of that fury off of it, draw it into yourself, and then those are the magic points that you spend to cast your spells. It's a really great system that has a lot of tension in it, because you don't want to raise too much fury, because then your beast might go wild and become uncontrollable. But it also has a lot of power in it, because if you are able to get this thing really riled up and really angry, not only is it very powerful, but you are very powerful because you've got all this magic now. There's a ton of war beast options in here, and a really neat system for growing your war beast. Most of them have the ability to cast a spell of their own. The war beast can, once you have trained them over time. And so after several sessions and you've leveled up and your beast is leveled up, you get to the point where you're like, okay, I've finally trained you how to use your animus, and now you can cast this extra spell and have this extra power. It's a lot of fun. It's a great system. The combat system for the game, both Unleashed and Iron Kingdoms, is essentially the tabletop system. It's like D&D's skill system combined with War Machine and Horde's tabletop combat system. They work together surprisingly well, and it's a really smooth system. It kind of demands that you use a battle map with minis because it's based on a war game, but you can absolutely play it without that if you've got players and a GM who are willing to just kind of fudge a few things and keep all of this in their head. You can absolutely play Theater of the Mind, even though the game assumes that you're going to be using minis, and it does work best with minis. The two exclusions that I want to mention are a little disappointing. Just like Iron Kingdoms doesn't really talk about the Iosan Elves and doesn't give you much opportunity to play Retribution of Sira. Yes, Iosan is one of the player races, but they don't really have the Retribution Warjacks and things like that. Anyway, Unleashed similarly leaves out the Legion of Everblight and Scorn. It focuses very strongly on the the tribes and the people that live in and around Immoren, which is why we have the Gatorman and the Pharaoh and the Tharn and all of these other things. And those are great options, and I'm not knocking that. But if you want to play Legion of Everblight, you don't really have that option. If you want to play Scorn, you don't have that option, because Scorn comes from far away, and while they are mentioned in the history section, there's no player options for them, and they're not even presented as a bad guy. There's no stats for using them as villains or creatures to fight against. Same with Legion of Everblight. They don't live far away. They live right here in the mountains of Immoren, but because they're all kind of mind-controlled by a big evil dragon, you can't play as them. And I can understand that. I'm sad about it, but I understand it. On the other hand, they're not included as villain options either. And I assume that they were originally planning some kind of companion book that would give NPC stats and monster stats for all of the Legion of Everblight dragons, for all of the Scorn beasts and warriors and stuff. And that would have been a really great thing to have. They just couldn't fit it into this already gargantuan book. What they do have at the end of the book is a wonderful template section. And this seems inspired by Pathfinder, because Pathfinder uses templates so well. Maybe it's inspired by something else, I don't know. I'm just making assumptions. But what this is, for example, is if you want to make your creature a war beast or a monster that the players are going to fight, if you want to make it bigger and scarier, you can give it the alpha template. If you want to make it sneakier, you can give it a different template. If you want to make a big scary monster weaker so lower level players can fight it, you can give it a different template that'll weaken it a little bit. One of these templates is Blighted, and so you can fake a lot of the Legion of Everblight characters and monsters by grabbing one of these other creatures and then throwing that blighted template onto it. And it's not a perfect solution to my specific problem, but it is there and it does work. And it can give you the chance to fight against some Everblight stuff. And so the template system really works well. It patches a lot of holes and makes the whole system a lot more modular. And there are a surprising number of templates that you're able to add to stuff. So that's really great. Anyway, huge selection of character options, enormous selection of bad guys to fight, stats for so many different kinds of trolls, absolutely gorgeous art for all of it. I collect the Legion of Everblight, which is why I was griping about it not being here. I also collect the Circle Ouroboros models and play them in the miniatures game. And I really love the look and the feel of all of that. And it's captured so wonderfully in here. The art is just really stellar. I mean, you can see behind me here, you know, druids riding on these big, cool, like goat things with barding armor. And all of the art in the book is like that. Just really fantastic fantasy art, very evocative. This is one of the great modern gaming settings, in my opinion. And a new 5th edition D&D is only going to cement that reputation and bring it to a much wider audience. In the meantime, Unleashed is a fantastic book. Goes into more detail on the world of Iron Kingdoms and of Immoren and of the tribes than anything else. And in fact, you know, there's no way that upcoming 5th edition book is going to include this much information. And so even if you, like me, are planning to switch over to the 5th edition eventually, this book is still really valuable because it has all of that world information, and that's not going to change. And so having all of that wonderful background and extensive descriptions of every single faction and where they live and how they live and what they do to survive and how they feel about each other. This is all great stuff that will always be valuable regardless of the format or the edition or the rule set or even what kind of a game you're playing. Even for the minis game, this is still great. Anyway, that is Iron Kingdoms Unleashed, which I love, and I hope you have a chance to give it a try. Anyway, excuse me, losing my voice. My name is Dan Wells, and I'm very grateful that you have watched this video. Thank you so much. Tell all your friends, and I will see you next week.